All right, everybody, it's about that time, so we're going to go ahead and get things started. Welcome. My name is Stephen Krutzfeldt. I'm a business process consultant here at CDI, and this month's consulting webinar is going to be Transparent Records Management, and it is going to be a build-along. If this is your first build-along, what is a build-along? In short, it is a interactive experience designed to guide the viewer through the creation and deployment of a common business process. Today's business process is going to be around records management and making them more accessible to non-record managers. If at any point you need help or have questions, please post your questions into the chat box on the floating GoToWebinar window. There will be a time at the end of this event for me to answer any questions that may have come up. Also note that if you did not get a chance to ask your question or it comes up later, you can always reach out to our team at CDI and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions that may come up later. Tips for success. Number one, take good notes. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm big into taking notes as well as screenshots. Take as many screenshots as possible. It's a little easier to follow. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Chances are if you have a question, someone else has the same one. You could just be the first one to ask it. Please do complete the survey afterwards. That will help me come up with ideas of what is working, what you guys enjoy seeing, what you get the most out of, and how I can improve these going month by month. And note that this will be recorded and individual sessions are available. It usually takes a couple of days for this to end up on CDI's YouTube channel, so this will be available afterwards. So don't feel like if you miss something, it's gone forever. It won't be. All right, so today's process, transparent records management. I'm going to do the best I can today to get into this without opening up a whole can of worms, because of course, records management, as any record managers on the call know, is very involved and there's a lot that goes into it. So this is going to be meant to be an introductory call into what records management can do and some best practices of managing records, but then also making them available and still keeping them secure. So the intended audience for this webinar is going to be records managers or any organization who is looking to implement records management who may want to know a little bit more about what that entails and what can be done with records management in Laserfiche. You'll need access to the workflow design tool, the Laserfiche client, as well as the administration console. If you'd like to follow along on the build along today, I recommend getting those open in the next couple of minutes, making sure that it'll be easy to transition into those different applications. To help you follow along, we're going to begin by setting up groups and security. We're going to add our users, we're going to add our groups, and then we're going to go through, and this will be a bit of a review from the webinar we had a couple of months ago where we actually set up user access and security for those different users and groups. So we'll do a little bit of that, and then we'll go into building our TRM, which stands for Transparent Records Management Workflow, the purpose of which will be to make it so records can be filed correctly based on disposition number, and then those records will also be available to be viewed and accessed, but not changed or altered in any way by users who are outside of the purview of record managers. We're then going to go ahead and test the process, and we'll actually dig in and see what each group is seeing, i.e. when they log into Laserfiche, who can see which part of the records management process and who's been restricted. Before we get into this, I just wanted to give a quick introduction into what records management is and why records management. The big one is compliance. That typically records are handled at the state level. There are different rules and regulations that states will put aside and say, for these types of documents, for state agencies, you need to retain this record for a certain amount of time. It can only be destroyed a certain way. There are a lot of rules that go into that. In order to stay compliant with this, that's why we have records managers. And Laserfiche is set up and designed in such a way that we can stay compliant with each one of those records based on what the state compliance says. Number two is visibility. By having everything set up in a very specific way, that makes it easier to access, easier to search by and find. It's also kept under lock and key, but also with especially with transparent records management, we do offer that transparency and visibility into additional users, so those are accessible to those who need to see it. And lastly, of course, is to mitigate risk. I say mitigate risk because it's by restricting the access to these records, you do decrease the risk of them being either lost or tampered with by someone who may be getting in there and playing around with it and who probably shouldn't be. That by ensuring that records managers are the only ones who are handling all of the information on the record, that does ultimately mitigate risk. Now, what makes records management different in Laserfiche? What is the difference between a record series and just a regular folder in Laserfiche? Well, first off, there's something called a cutoff instruction. Cutoff instruction can either be a time period or an event. So saying that cutoff instruction can either be 3 years or it can be when it was processed. That's how long until this record can be changed. Once it's been cut off, no more changes, no more alterations, nothing else can be done with it. Another big one is the retention schedule. How long do we need to keep this in our own records before we can either get rid of it or ascend it? All of that is going to be handled also within the record series, and I will show you that as well, but those are the two big ones. And then lastly, of course, disposition. States will say that a record can only be disposed of in a certain way, either through ascension, where it'll be filed someplace else permanently, or destruction, in which case only certain users and individuals can destroy it, and that's only after it's been a certain period has been reached or a certain event has taken place. I did want to just grab a snapshot here. This is coming directly from the state of Washington. They have something called CORE, which is a Local Government Common Records Retention Schedule, as you can see up here. Every record type is going to be in this 200-page document with very specific instructions. So any record that falls under the purview of these, one of these, what are called as DANs, or disposition authority numbers, it's going to have detailed descriptions as well as the retention and disposition action, i.e. the retention schedule, and then how are we then going to, once it's reached that, how do we disposition it? Is it something we destroy or is it through ascension? So these are very tightly guarded. They're very, this is compliance that you need to stay in compliant with when dealing with records. So all of the decisions that are made and the way things are handled comes from this. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. For more information on that, there are a lot of resources out there, but also feel free to reach out to CDI. We've implemented records management for many different districts, cities, counties. So this is something that we're very familiar with. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. But with that, let's go ahead and get into the demonstration. So the first thing we're going to do before we get into transparent record management workflow is we need to set up our different users who are going to be accessing our Laserfiche repository. Now we do that by accessing the admin console, which are these keys here. You will have to be a Laserfiche administrator in order to access this. And then we're going to select our repository. If you only have one repository, that'll be really easy. In my case, we're going to go to the business repository, and we'll select our users and groups. Now the difference between repository users and repository groups is a group is made up of multiple users. A user can have their own security rights and access restrictions, but it's always best practice to assign security to groups. Since all users within a group will then inherit the group's rights, this is the easiest and most consistent method of assigning security. So here we can see our different groups, and to save a little time today, I went ahead and created these ahead of time. Administrators, admins, are going to have our different admin types. You can see here, I just double click that to open that up. There's just a basic name and description, and then we can see which members are assigned to the admin group. And it's going to be our workflow user, our forms user, and our admin. And these are the types of folks that are going to have rights and privileges, meaning that they will be able to basically do anything that they want with all the different documents and folders and records in Laserfiche, but they can also assign privileges to the different trustees, to the different users and groups and so forth. We also are going to have our HR group and our records manager. So for today's example, rather than get into something that's very specific to a city or a state, I thought we could take a look at human resource management records, something that every organization is going to have. If you think about accessibility and records management as a whole, the records managers are going to be the ones who maintain and keep information like I-9 documents for an employee, payroll information, things like that. But there is going to need to be transparency for the HR department and even possibly for the employee themselves, that there may be certain documents that they'll need to be able to access or at least requisition, in which case the HR folks would need to be able to deliver that to them. Now, how do we deliver that information without disrupting the record information that we put in place? That's what TRM, Transparent Records Management, is really all about. So the other two groups we have here are our records managers, and I just gave them one member for now, but this of course could be all of your records managers, but RM, record management. They're gonna have rights to do pretty much whatever they want within records management, which is why I selected all of these, but they're not necessarily going to be managing any sort of trustees or anything like that. That's gonna be left to the admins. And then lastly is gonna be HR, kind of the same story. We have just Toby here. Everybody who's met me before knows I'm a big Office fan, so that's our HR guy. And then the same rights are going to be available. We're going to end up assigning these to just the HR folders though. You'll want to make sure that they aren't completely left out of the loop with no rights whatsoever. So now that we have our groups in place, the other thing we're going to do within the admin console today is make sure that we have a template set up. Metadata template is attributes and information about a document or folder that comes in. It's mainly used for searching as well as just assigning basic information to the document or folder. The template is made up of many fields. All this information can also be seen on some of our previous consulting webinars. If you want to go back into those YouTube videos, there will be more information there if this is a new concept. But I went ahead and created a new template called Human Resource Management, or Human Resources rather. And you can see the different fields that we're going to be working with is kind of going to transcend from records management also to HR, that we are going to have the employee data, employee first name, last name, department, positions, so on and so forth, but we're also going to have the record description and the disposition number, or the DAN number. The reason we bring this in and use this is because that's going to be the number that's in compliance with what the state has set aside, and that's how we're going to know how long we need to maintain this record once it's saved and how we're going to dispose of it later. All that information is important to have, and by putting it on the document, we're going to use this in the workflow to make sure it gets filed into the right records series. We do have a couple of lookups here also. Those of you who sat in on the dynamic fields webinar will know how to create a SQL table like this and then tie that into your different fields and your different templates. So here we're going to have a DAN and a description back here, but we're also going to be looking at a list or table of all of our different employees as well, so we can select those from a drop-down. And you'll see how that becomes dynamic. So once you have a template in place for the types of documents or records that we're going to be filing, we can go ahead and close that out. Just say OK. Please note also that in order to make a template dynamic based on external tables, you do need to register that external table here. The two we're going to be using today are Office Lite, which is going to be all of our different Office characters here, as well as our records DANs. And if it's effective, you should be able to view all that information from within that little iframe there. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is go into our Laserfiche repository and start assigning the basic rights and restrictions and security based on the groups that we have already. So I've signed into my LF Business repository as the administrator. As the administrator, I can see all the different folders and all the different records that are in here. You'll notice that this folder looks a little different. The icon looks different from these others. That's because this one is in fact a record series. Think of a record series as just being the filing cabinet, if you will. And inside the record series, we're going to have records folders. And you can see this looks a little bit different from our normal folder. The difference there is if we open this up, we can see our record properties instead of just our regular properties. And that's where we're going to have things like a code if you want to use that. Otherwise, we have like the name, we have the cutoff instruction, whether it's going to be an event or a time period, the retention schedule, how long are we going to maintain these records after cutoff. And then we also have the disposition authority or DAN number down here as well, which is going to come into play when we create our TRM workflow. But that's the key difference between a record series and a regular folder, is that all this information is embedded, all those attributes are assigned. You'll also notice then that will be on the folders as well. So if the folder is going to have its own restrictions, you can maintain all of that here as well. But that's also inherited on all the way down as well if you want to inherit that through the tree. So one thing that we're going to need to do is, first of all, kind of plan out who needs to view what, who should have access to what. So for administrators, we want them to have access to everything. And that can be inherited all the way through. So we need to go to the very top level and look at our access rights at the repository level, and we can see our admins have access to everything. What that then means is if we go into a lower folder in the tree and we look at our access rights, which by the way, I'm just right-clicking on there and going down to access rights, we can look up and choose, see the effective rights for each one of our users or each one of our groups. So if I want to see the effective rights for the admin, we can see that even though I didn't assign rights to the admin at the human resources folder level, they still have access to everything because it's inherited down. Now for our other groups, the other two are record management and HR. We don't want the HR group to have anything to do with the actual records here. That we want them to be able to see the human resources folders, but nothing in records. So what we do is we go to the top level of the records management, right click, go down to access rights. And within here, we can see that records managers and admins have access to this, but nothing really for HR. So let's go ahead and add them in here. And what I'm going to do is a little bit of a trick. First, going to select our groups. Always best to assign groups, not users. And what I'm going to do first is actually say for this entry only, meaning for this top level folder, I want to deny all. I don't want them to see this at all, okay? However, I'm also going to go back in here, right click, access rights. I'm going to add HR again. And this time I'm going to allow all, but I'm going to say only for, under the scope, subfolders and documents. And let me show you, actually before I do this, let me show you why I'm going to do this. So right now we can't see this. Let's go ahead and sign out. And we're going to sign in as Toby. So Toby comes in and Toby cannot see now the records management area, but he can see HR and the employee files. Well, one of the employee files in here is a shortcut to an existing record. It's actually pointing to the records management. So he needs to see the insurance card for Dwight Schrute to make sure it's not expired, but it's showing permission denied. Even though he has access to all of this and he has browse and he has all the rights, he can't actually view this because he's restricted from everything in the records. So a way to get around that So we go ahead and sign out of here and go back in as our admin again. We can go to the records, go to the access rights, add HR again, and say that for subfolders and documents, we can allow all, and say okay. So now if we sign out again, and we sign in again as Toby, now we can view that insurance card and all of its information. I understand this isn't actually an insurance card, it's an invoice, but for the sake of the demo, we can see all the different fields and all the information, and we would be able to now view this. This is a trick called tunneling, and what tunneling does is it hides the record piece, but it still makes sure that anyone within this area can still access and view the shortcuts to all of that. So tunneling, you can write that one down. All right, so we're gonna sign back in one more time as our admin. And the other side of this is really easy. We go into human resources, go into our access rights. You can see I already added HR in here. Records managers also have access here. And then with records managers, if we look at our access rights, we'll see that record managers have free reign to do whatever they want here. So let's recap really quickly what we did. We created 3 groups: admin, record managers, and HR. We gave admin free reign of everything, records managers free reign of records, and HR free reign of the HR group, but not records. We also went ahead and created a template with HR information that will be assigned to the HR documents and also drive what record series that will be saved into, which of course will then determine how long we maintain it, how it is then either destroyed or if it's ascended, the disposition, and things like that. Now the last piece is to create our workflow that manages the records for us. This is the actual TRM thing. This is what we've been building up to, right? So exciting. The first thing that we do when we create a new workflow, which I just opened up the workflow design tool down here and hit the blueprint with a little star on it, which means create new. Best practice is always to give it a unique name that will let us know what it does. I'm gonna call it Transparent Records Management. You can give it a description as well. We'll make sure that we have the correct profile here. And since we're working out of our LF business repository, we'll select that one. We validate it, it should say success. That will mean that we are in fact connected. And the first thing that we're gonna do, and if you've built a couple of workflows in the past, you'll know this is probably the most common starting activity, and that's to retrieve field values. It looks like this. And what that means is that when something gets scanned in, we want to look at the metadata. So I'm going to call this one retrieve HR fields because this one's going to pertain only to our HR template. We click in this blue box here, it'll let us select the fields that we want to grab off the document. In my case, I want to use an entire template and I want to grab all of the HR information. Even though I may not use it all, let's go ahead and retrieve it all. So we can just use the select clear all box down here. Grab that. Also make sure to always look at the value source. What are we pulling it off of? That will come in handy a little bit later. But right now we're just using the starting entry. Of course, there is no other entry yet, but that's always something that can be a sort of a gotcha later on when you're building these. So once we have that, the next thing we want to do is search our repository based on some of the fields that we retrieved. What we're going to do here is we know that when a record of any type gets scanned in and it has that metadata, the most important part is to understand what its disposition number is going to be, that DAN number that I showed you on the slides to begin with. So we need to pull that off and then use that to go in and find the correct corresponding record folder within Laserfiche. So if it's an employee application, that's going to have a DAN number of GS50-04, so on and so forth. So we need to find the correct folder or record series to save that into. Now, if you're really good at just pounding out different search queries and you can write this, then that's amazing, good on you. I'm not. I need to cheat a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll open up the repository, go to our search activity, and we're going to customize our search here. So I'm just going to close all these out so there's no search activity. And you'll notice there's two different types here. There's the customized search, which is just regular, and then the records management search. We're going to be using both of these. The main thing I want, though, and the most important part is if we go into customize search, the search syntax. Reason for that, that's going to display in the language that Laserfiche understands what's actually being written. So it's going to basically write the code for me, so to speak. The other thing I want is I'm going to be looking for the proper record series, and more specifically the DAN number. So we'll go ahead and grab our record series, or actually record folder, yeah, record series, and disposition authority. And you know what, I'm sorry, I'm second guessing myself here. Let's do the name, record folder name. Now I went ahead and copied and pasted the disposition number specifically that I want, just to make sure that this works. And as you can see, it found based on record series. So record folder name, make sure we check record series, disposition authority, and then it wrote my syntax for me. So we can just go ahead and copy that, go back to our workflow, and in the search query, we can type that in there, test it, and we should see it come back with one entry. So we know it works. And I'm going to rename this, find record series, so we know what it does. Now, believe it or not, we're halfway done. This is a really short workflow and very easy, but very powerful. The next thing we want to do is move entry. So we're going to find our move entry activity here. We're going to call it move record to record series or record folder. Seems redundant. How about this? Move to record folder. Sounds better, right? So we want to move the starting entry. We want to move it to, and here we can select our destination. I always like to open the token dialog. So if you select that token picker or the little greater than sign and open up our token dialog, we can start grabbing one of our tokens. And since we found the record series in this activity, we can say we want to go to the full path. Now, I recently had this conversation with a couple of other users. What is the difference between full path and path? The easiest way to think about it is you're really ever going to use full path if you're looking for a folder, because full path will mean that we are looking for a folder within a tree. We found that folder, so we want to go all the way inside of the folder that we found. Whereas first result path would be the location of the folder we found, or think about if we found a document, then it would make sense to follow just the path. So if we're looking for a folder and we went to the first result path, then the path would put it in the exact same location as the folder we were looking for. It wouldn't put it inside the folder we found. I hope I'm not talking in circles. I hope you understand me. I'm just gonna pretend I can hear your heads nodding like, oh, sure, we got it. But what you need to know here is that since we're looking for a record series folder, we want to put it inside that folder, so that means full path. Full path means the folder that we found. Now, if you want to, you can go deeper and select some additional subfolders to tuck this into as well. Like if you want to have a specific folder within the record series for that individual employee, or if you want to have it be departmental or something like that, then you can always add something else here too. So if we wanted to, we could just use our retrieve field values and say employee last name, comma, employee first name. We can do it that way. Another option would just be to go ahead and put it into a year folder. To do year folder, we would just go ahead and grab our date, and then we will format it. So we'll highlight that, format, and the format for year is YYYY. You can always test that too by typing in a date and see that it grabbed only the 1984 piece out of that date. So what this is saying is that we're going to find a record series folder, put it in that folder, but then also go into a subfolder called with the year. Now the last piece, and the probably most important part of this, we're going to use the move entry again, although in this time we're going to call it create record shortcut. And you'll see here in the action, we have the option to move, copy, or create shortcut. And the create shortcut is the one that we want. And the destination for this one, once again, we're gonna go to our token selector and choose our tokens. And in this case, actually, you know what? We're gonna choose the ellipses first. The ellipses will open up our folder structure. We know we wanna put it into human resources, and we know we wanna put it into employee files. Now, we don't know exactly which employee it's going to be referring to, so we're just going to keep it right at employee files, and then we'll open up our token dialog and we'll add our tokens to make it a little bit more detailed. So based on our retrieve field values, we have all of our employee information. So we'll say employee last name, comma, space, employee first name. So that way it'll go into employee files and then a folder that's named last name, comma, first name for whichever employee we are assigning or creating the record for. And the last thing I always do on all of my workflows is track tokens. Track tokens is best practice because it offers an extra level of visibility into how the workflow runs. That when it retrieves field values up here, it's creating those tokens that we selected, like first name and last name, but it won't necessarily tell us what those are unless we track the tokens. Last thing is we're going to publish this by pressing the green arrow pointing up to the right. And it's going to prompt us and say, do you want to add a condition or a schedule or nothing at all? And I actually do want there to be a condition. I want to say that when this is created, best practice, by the way, when creating rules is to give it some sort of unique rule also of, is this rule around the creation or the movement or the change? We always at CDI have it be the action, like created, followed by the name of the workflow itself. We want to make sure condition is selected. Also, enabled is very important, otherwise it won't work. Next, we want to make sure that the event type is created. We also want to make sure that we're getting our metadata from the correct repository, if in fact you do have multiple repositories. That all looks good. We're going to be working only with documents at this point. We're only saving documents, so that's when the entry is brought in, document is correct. We also want to limit this though, so it doesn't run on every single document. We're going to go ahead and say the entry path, i.e. where is the document being saved to. I'm going to say it's going to equal incoming scans. This is something we like to do in all of our folder structures. Always have an incoming scans location where every document can come in, and then let workflow file it and do everything from there. We're also going to say that the template we created, so entry template name equals our HR template we made. So it has to be a document. The document has to be created in the incoming scans location. It has to have the template name human resources. And last, always, 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 user does not equal workflow. If you've never had an endless workflow loop take off on you, then consider yourself lucky. It's to ensure that you keep that streak going. Make sure that workflow cannot invoke itself. Always user does not equal workflow in all rules. Also, best practice is to make sure that the rules that are most difficult to satisfy are at the top, because it'll go through each one of these until it either can't satisfy one or basically what you need to know is it starts from the top and moves through here. So you're going to get a lot of documents come in, and so this workflow is going to try and run every time a document is scanned in. So we want to stop that by saying that the human resource, move it all the way to the top. I'm just using that green arrow to drag that up. So entry template equals human resources. There won't be very many, especially ones coming into incoming scans. And then document and workflow can kind of be at the bottom here. But that's the order that you should be putting things in. And then we can go ahead and publish it and finish. So let's go ahead and see what we've done. We're going to go back into our Laserfiche repository and just move all this up. Go into incoming scans, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up one of my sample documents here. And I'm just going to drag and drop it into the incoming scans location. It'll prompt me for a template. We're going to put my human resources template on here. And we'll give it a document type. Maybe this is an employment application. The employee last name, I guess it doesn't make sense because these are current employees, but moving past that, we'll say this is for Michael Scott. And you'll notice that that automatically populated. That's because of the dynamic fields that I have in place. It's pulling information in from an external table. And since there's only one employee in that table with the last name Scott, it automatically filled in the rest of it. Say today's scan date. And then the most important part here is the record description and DAN number. I have it set up so you just choose what type of document it is, or what type of record rather. It's recruitment, and so the DAN number filled in automatically. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. That's going to process. And we'll notice it disappeared. That's because the workflow ran and it did what we told it to. So if that's the case, what we should see is that it found the employment applications record series, and then it also went into a year folder, and then we have our documents. And so we can go ahead and look at the metadata on that. We can see all the information there. We can see that it found the DAN number and filed it correctly. We can also see that the folder it filed into is going to have all of the same information regarding the DAN number, the retention schedule, and then the cutoff instruction. I understand these probably aren't correct or in compliance, so you guys can all kind of yell at me later, like, Steven, why didn't you make it more accurate? I'm sorry. That was a test to make sure that you're paying attention. The other thing it should have done is gone into the human resources location, and we should see should have seen one for Michael Scott. And since we didn't, it makes me wonder what went wrong. And so you can always see how a workflow ran by going into common searches, going into recent activity, seeing this. It looks like everything worked correctly, so maybe it just needs a chance to update. So back in here, let's go ahead and sign out and see what our other groups can see besides admin. So we'll go ahead and sign out, sign back in as Toby. Toby doesn't have a password, he doesn't get one, he doesn't deserve one. And there we can see the Michael Scott folder under employee file. So it did run, it was just taking a minute to load. And so Toby can then go in, and he can't see the records series or do anything with records management up here, but he can go in and see Michael Scott's employment application here. So if there was a request coming into HR for that document, Toby would still have access to still be able to give it to that employee. So if we go ahead and sign out here and sign back in as our records management person, oops, RM, oops. There we go. You can go in here and see that the records manager does in fact have access to all the different record series here. They can go in and view that information, everything here. But if they want to, they can also go in and view the shortcut as well. So they do have access to all of that. But if we wanted to restrict the shortcut and maybe the records manager shouldn't have access to the HR folder, that's a very easy change. So that in a nutshell, taking something very complicated and trying to cram it all into 40 minutes or so, that's transparent records management. If you want more information on this or anything else that we do here at CDI, or any other questions about Laserfiche or records or anything we discussed today, or anything else just regarding Laserfiche in general, some great resources here are the answers. I always say that when you Google something about Laserfiche, the first thing that always comes up is usually something that was posted on Laserfiche Answers, which is the Laserfiche community asking questions to one another and then answering as well. There is a very large following there, and chances are you're not the first person to have that question. So it's a great place to go. Also, we have the Solution Exchange. We also have the city's digital peak portals, which has other documents relating to everything Laserfiche related. Please do fill out the survey for a chance to win an awesome CDI mug. Also, like I said, when you fill out that survey, it helps me come up with what I'm doing right, what I can do better. How can you guys get more out of these monthly sessions? And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. But thank you everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate everyone on here. I hope you found this helpful. So any questions? What if Toby deletes the shortcut or edits the document? Great question. So what I've actually done, and I'm just gonna go ahead and pop this back open. I hope you guys don't mind here. When we went into and set this all up, one thing that we did to make sure that that can't happen, so I logged back in as admin. I don't know if you saw me do that or not. And we said that resources, access rights, HR only has view, browse, read, and see annotations rights here. So they cannot add, they cannot modify, they cannot delete, he can't make any changes to this whatsoever. Otherwise, you're right. So a shortcut, if you're not familiar, is basically just a window, and it's like a portal into the original document. A shortcut cannot have different metadata from the original. It's just looking at the metadata on the original. Similarly, if you change the shortcut, you change the original. So in order to make sure that doesn't happen, we make it so Toby can't interact with the original. He can only view the copy, or rather not the copy. He can only view the shortcut. Good question. What other questions do you guys have? Remember also, if you do have any additional questions, you can certainly reach out to us at cdi.support. We have a relatively large team who's always standing by, eager to answer questions and show off their Laserfiche knowledge. Well, if there are no other questions, then thanks again, everybody, for tuning in today. Have a great rest of your week. Happy New Year, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, everybody.